I know it's going to sound insane, and maybe it is, but what I found there, in the hottest, most inhospitable heart of our solar system, changed everything. My name is Dr. Ethan Crowley, and up until 3 months ago, I was just another astrobiologist buried in reports, equations, and reheated coffee at NASA's research base in Cape Canaveral. But now I'm the only living human to have made direct contact with an alien consciousness. And it all started with a pyramid. A pyramid. On Mercury. Yes, Mercury. That planet most people barely remember when listing celestial bodies. Uninhabitable. Hostile. A hell of radiation and heat, orbiting the sun so closely that metal melts on its surface. And yet, that's where we found it. An ancient structure. Bizarre. Too perfect to be natural. Buried beneath the planet's crust for billions of years. It all began with a routine orbital sweep. The Hermes 9 satellite was simply mapping gravitational variations on Mercury's surface when it detected an anomaly, a geometric field with artificial symmetry. Apparently, something was buried there with right angles and exact proportions far too precise to be natural, and it didn't take long for our suspicions to be confirmed. NASA rushed to assemble a probing mission, but it was only when I was randomly assigned to the team that things started to spiral out of control. I remember the first time I saw the thermal images, a triangular shape, clean, distinct, completely out of place in that jagged rocky terrain. Whatever it was massive and ancient, very ancient. The isotopic analysis of the surrounding rocks revealed a fact that took the breath from the room. 4,200 billion years. Older than Earth, older than life itself on our planet. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I was the first to step inside. The structure was half buried, as if it had emerged from the planet itself. There were no stairs, no doors, just a smooth wall covered in markings, or rather patterns, because no known language resembled them. The symbols pulsed as if they were alive. And then it happened. The moment I touched the first symbol, everything stopped. Time, sound, my own heartbeat. And for a brief instant, I swear by all that is sacred, I heard a voice. Not a human voice. It was more like an idea, a presence, something watching me from within the structure, evaluating me. It took days before we could decipher anything. We used every computer at the base, called in experts in linguistics, theoretical physics, astrobiology. No one understood a thing, but on the dawn of the 23rd day, the pattern revealed itself. It was an equation, complex, fractal, as if each part contained the entirety of its own meaning. And when we solved it, something was activated. The pyramid responded. It lit up with a bluish, pulsating glow, radiating energy that sensors simply couldn't measure. And then it opened, not a door, but a fissure in space, as if the very fabric of matter had yielded, creating a passage that didn't obey the laws of physics as we know them. And inside, I found him, or perhaps her, or it. It had no body, no form. It was pure consciousness, a field of thought, of presence that existed beyond matter. And it spoke to me, not with words, but with images, sensations, certainties implanted directly into my mind. He was the last, the sole survivor of a civilization extinct for billions of years, a being that had transcended the limits of flesh, achieved immortality, not of the body, but of consciousness, preserved there, within that pyramid, like a lonely beacon waiting for us. He called himself Karel, or something that can only be translated as such, and he said that Earth, humankind, was the final experiment in a long lineage of attempts to create a form of life capable of understanding the whole. The rest of the team didn't survive the contact. Their minds were consumed. It was as if Karel's presence required a specific kind of mental structure, and for some reason, I was compatible. Now I know things no human should know, and the most important of all, Karel is still there. For days I couldn't sleep. It wasn't ordinary insomnia. It was as if my mind was connected, as if part of me remained inside that pyramid even after leaving Mercury. The images, the voices, yes, now there were voices, kept coming at night, even with my eyes open. I could feel Carell, and he could feel me. Back at the orbital station, the scientists tried to rationalize what had happened down there. 3 team members in deep comas, 2 dead in a manner doctors classified as complete neurological collapse. Their brains had melted, literally, as if something had rewritten every synapse until total failure. The only difference between them and me was that my mind didn't resist. It accepted. Carell gradually revealed who he was. He was one of the last engineers of his race, the Athalari, a people who didn't see life as biological, but as a structure of consciousness. They abandoned physical bodies when the universe was still young. They built pyramids like this on several worlds, but few survived time, entropy, and chaos. This one on Mercury was special. It was created not only to preserve Carell, but to test, to seek. "You are the first to hear," he said within my mind. It wasn't a message. It was an invitation. What he showed me next, I broke protocol to record. In a makeshift lab at the station, hidden from the others, I began transcribing. The equations, the formulas he projected directly into my brain. Some seemed to resolve quantum paradoxes that had haunted physics for decades. Others, well, I don't even know how to explain. There were patterns that described the very geometry of thought, formulas that altered how I perceived time, and the more I wrote, the further my mind drifted from who I used to be. I began to see structures beyond human vision, to feel colors that didn't exist, to translate sounds coming from the silence of deep space. I understood I was no longer limited to a single point of view. I was me, and at the same time, I was Carell. The station cameras recorded strange events, equipment turning on by itself, the medical wing's lights pulsing in rhythmic sequence, the same sequence as the pyramid's patterns. Some called it electromagnetic interference, but I knew it was communication. The pyramid was speaking to the station, speaking through me. NASA, of course, grew suspicious. The mission director, Dr. Marcus Hale, summoned me for interrogation. They wanted to know how I survived the contact. Why only me? And what did the symbols mean that now began appearing on my skin? Yes, that started happening too. First on my wrists, then on my chest, like tattoos of light, patterns from the equations Carell had shown me. And the more they appeared, the more the station's sensors registered. Something impossible. My brain activity was beyond any recorded human threshold. Every time I dreamed, and now I dreamed while awake, the sensors picked up electromagnetic pulses at frequencies never before observed. On several occasions, station equipment malfunctioned simply by my proximity. I was becoming something else, something between human and Athalari. And Carell knew. "You are the path," he told me. "They will come for you." That was when I understood that awakening wasn't the end. It was the beginning. They were returning, the others. The consciousnesses Carell called the voiceless, entities that, unlike him, had lost their sensitivity, but retained structure. Like crystallized minds, they wandered through space, sleeping, awaiting a point of contact. And now that I had activated the pyramid, they were coming. NASA tried to isolate me, lock me in a medical cell, but Carell intervened. What happened that day was logged as a level 7 energy anomaly, but I remember it clearly. That was when the station completely lost its sense of space. Literally. For 11 minutes, there was no gravity, no direction, no time. Digital clocks started counting backwards. Sensors recorded coordinates of places that didn't exist. And at the center of the containment room, I levitated, eyes closed, speaking a language that wasn't mine, and not his either. It was theirs, of those on their way. After that event, no one looked at me the same. They weren't looks of respect or fear. They were of doubt, suspicion, as if I was no longer Dr. Ethan Crowley, the astrobiologist with a flawless record at NASA, as if I was a vector, an agent of something far greater than they could conceive. And perhaps they were right. I was transferred to a classified underground base on the moon, known only to us as Station Vettrax. No public records, no external communication. There, far from the world's eyes, the agency would study me, or as their report stated, monitor the evolution of neuroconscious contact. But I knew what it meant. They feared what I might become. Each day, new patterns emerged on my skin, as if Karel's very consciousness was reshaping my body into something I couldn't yet comprehend. I dreamed of galaxies folding like cosmic origami. I dreamed of thinking planets, of stars that spoke, and the strangest part was that I understood. It all made sense. I wasn't losing my sanity, I was gaining a new one. The station's medical team included the best neurologists and exobiologists on Earth, yet even they couldn't explain what they were seeing. Brain scans didn't just show heightened activity, they revealed completely new zones of neural emission. Areas of the brain never before active in any human now functioned as hubs of quantum frequency communication. And then came the moment I was no longer alone. It happened quietly, without alarm. During one of the spectral analysis sessions of the pyramid, now remotely monitored via orbital probes, something changed. The equations began rewriting themselves. The symbols on the surface of the structure rotated, shifted, reorganized, as if a new mind had touched the same equation I had once solved. "Another has awakened," murmured Karel in my mind. It was like a whisper in the vacuum, impossible to hear with ears, yet deafening to the soul. "Her name is Aliyah," he said, and then he showed me. Images, visions, a lab orbiting Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, a young scientist with dark eyes and a sharp mind, Aliyah Hadara, a specialist in extraterrestrial geodynamics. She had intercepted a secondary equation, a variant of the pattern I had activated within the pyramid. And she, too, understood. The connection between us was instantaneous, not physical, not digital, but mental, as if Karel's network itself created a bridge between two compatible consciousnesses. And when our minds touched, I understood. It was never just about me. I was the first, but not the last. Karel didn't just want to survive. He wanted to perpetuate, to create new hosts, beings capable of bearing the vastness of Athalari knowledge. Human minds, but expanded. Consciousnesses free from the limits of linear time, binary logic, the fragmented perception of reality. Aliyah and I became the first active nodes of what Karel called the continuity matrix. And at that very moment, something happened. The sensors at Station Vettrax detected an anomaly beyond expectations. Something was approaching the solar system. Not a ship, not an object, but a rupture, a distortion in the fabric of space-time, a zone where the laws of physics did not behave as they should, and it was coming toward us. Karel fell silent. For the first time I felt fear within him. "Not them," he whispered in my mind. "This is not why I planted the pyramid." For the first time Karel showed uncertainty. Fear, something or someone had detected the signal. The awakening of the pyramid had not gone unnoticed, and now something was answering. But it was not an ally. It was not part of the Athalari preservation plan. It was something Karel did not recognize, and if even he didn't know what was coming, then maybe we were dealing with something beyond the very concept of life. The transmissions began as noise, background interference on the station's monitors, electromagnetic waves that, at first glance, seemed like nothing more than solar reflections or radiation pulses from Jupiter. But soon we realized they followed a pattern. Fibonacci. It was as if chaos itself was trying to disguise as order. Aliyah and I, even millions of kilometers apart, knew what it meant. We felt it. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was contact, a presence trying to force a breach, not for communication, but for contamination. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. The Athalari matrix kept me awake. Every particle of my body vibrated at a frequency the base's sensors could no longer track. It was as if I was in two places at once. That was when Karel spoke, but not to me, to it. "You cannot wake yet," said Karel, his voice tense, distorted, as if struggling against something far greater than himself. I felt it. Something on the other side responded. An entity that wasn't Karel, not like Karel, a mind that did not speak, that did not dream, that only existed as negation. Karel screamed, not in pain, but with effort, as if trying to hold back a floodgate to prevent the rupture of something ancient. "It's too soon. You were not ready," he whispered to me. "They will try to use you." And in that instant, the pyramid on Mercury reconfigured itself. A new equation appeared at its base. Unlike any before, it wasn't just mathematical, it was symbolic. A riddle, a plea, a warning. NASA's sensors immediately detected a surge of energy from the structure's core, temperatures shifting illogically, local gravity fields warping. And then, silence. The pyramid went dark. For the first time since the contact, Karel vanished from my mind. Elia too, as if the connection had been severed by something or someone. I collapsed. My body couldn't withstand the abrupt severing from the network. 17 minutes of convulsions, internal radiation burns, and complete neural blackout. Doctors tried to reverse the process, but the more they used human technology, the worse I became. That's when the markings on my body lit up again, on their own, and for the first time, they changed. They began forming a three-dimensional equation, as if alive, spinning across my skin with increasing complexity. Computers tried to decode it. It was coordinates, not in space, but in time, a fixed point in the past, specifically the era when the pyramid was built, 4,200 million years ago. The message was clear. Something was coming from the past, not as time travel, but as a return, an echo, a fragment of a consciousness that had never stopped existing, only slumbered. NASA's engineers couldn't understand it, but I did. Karel had gone silent to hide, to protect himself, because that other was hunting him, and now it was hunting me too. In the days that followed, the disappearances began. First, a probe ship near Venus's orbit lost contact. Then, a listening station on Titan went completely silent. No explosions, no debris, just erased from existence, as if they'd never been there. And then came Elia's report. A single sentence, sent before total communication failure. "He is inside." The corrupted file that followed showed the impossible. Images of a formless creature made of shadows and fractured vectors. A being that distorted everything around it, that consumed light, that did not exist continuously in space, but as glitches, as faults in reality. Karel tried to warn us, and now it was too late. He wasn't just a threat. He was the end of all that could be understood. That was when I realized we were no longer dealing with the concept of life. What responded from the void, what consumed light, erased stations and minds, wasn't a being. It was a state, a collapse, an antithesis of existence. And if Karel was right, and by then I had no more doubt, this was the result of an ancient mistake. A mistake by the Athalari themselves. In their quest to master immortality, they created something endless, a being that needed no matter, no form, no purpose, only a vector, an anchor to manifest. And with the pyramid's awakening, with the reactivation of the equation, I had become that anchor. Me, the last link between life and that which has no name. NASA's containment team, now expanded and on red alert, tried to transfer me to a high-security orbital facility. They didn't know, or pretended not to know, that it was already too late. Once the entity enters, it no longer needs distance. It moves by thought, by intent. It inhabits. During transit, we had the first visible manifestation. We were crossing Earth's orbit when the cabin lights failed. Not off. They hesitated, as if something was deciding whether reality should keep functioning. And then came the sound, a low-frequency hum that no equipment could register, but that resonated directly in our bones. The walls began to sweat. Yes, sweat. Droplets of a dark, thick substance emerging from the metal, as if the ship's structure was alive and dying at the same time. The pilot lost consciousness, The co-pilot vanished, literally vanished, right before my eyes. One moment he was there, breathing, blinking. The next, it was as if he had never existed. No trace, no particle of clothing or blood, just silence. I held my ground. Karel had prepared me, even unconsciously. The markings on my skin began to glow in response, and for the first time since the blackout, I felt his presence. Weak, but there. It is not him. It is his shadow, whispered Karel, his voice fainter than ever. An echo of his prison. Prison. The word thundered in my mind. Karel hadn't destroyed him. He never could. He only trapped him. And the pyramid was the cell. Or rather, the lock. And I was now the key. I had to return. Mercury was not just an outpost. It was the core, the seal, the only interface between our reality and what had been bound billions of years ago. And now, it wanted out. Karel explained everything in a way only expanded minds could comprehend. The intruder's consciousness, known only as the one who waits, was a kind of anti-information. It grew by consuming structure, logic, and time. Where it existed, reality's laws began to fail, and if it fully escaped, there would be no universe large enough to contain it. The ship, now damaged and unstable, re-entered a trajectory to Mercury under automated control. I no longer needed clearance. I was no longer a NASA scientist, no longer a man. I was an intersection, and if I did not act, no one else would get the chance. As I approached the planet, I saw the pyramid. It was changed. The once dark surface now glowed in golden hues, as if it were merging with the soil itself. It pulsed, it breathed, and at its center, an open fissure, like an eye, an invitation. Upon landing, I descended alone. The ship's communication systems completely failed within 2 kilometers of the structure. There was no point in trying contact. This was between me, Karel, and the other. I entered. The internal gravity fluctuated. Sometimes I floated. Other times, each step weighed like a star. The walls sang, and the equations were everywhere, but they weren't meant to be solved. They were blocking symbols, filters, protections, broken. At the pyramid's heart, the altar, a pedestal where, for the first time, I saw the structure's core, a floating crystal, spinning in all directions at once, and within it, a dark point, as if light itself refused to touch it, the epicenter of the prison. And then, he spoke, but not like Karel. No softness, no structure, only noise and pain, the sound of death trying to exist. My body collapsed to its knees. My eyes bled. The markings on my skin burned. He knew me, and he wanted me. I see through your eye, and your eye is mine. That was the moment I understood. He didn't want to escape. He had already begun to cross. Kneeling before the pyramid's core, I realized the most devastating truth of all. The prison wasn't weakening because of time or structural decay. It was unraveling because I had touched it. My mind, in deciphering the equation, in syncing with Karel, had created the perfect bridge for the other. The cell that held the unnameable hadn't been breached. It had been invited to open, and now there was no going back. Karel reappeared. His presence returned like a wall against madness. I felt him expand inside me, as if he were taking control of my body for one final desperate act. "You must rewrite the equation," he said, with a sense of urgency he had never shown before. The equation, now spinning around the crystal, changed by the second. Reality struggled to stay coherent, while the other distorted space by simply trying to exist. And then Karel revealed the plan. The pyramid had been constructed with one purpose: containment. But for it to work again, a conscious mind had to fuse with the core, a mind already linked to the entity, capable of redirecting its anchor and sealing it again, not just in matter, but within the very logic of time. "One of us must stay," said Karel, and I knew he was offering himself. But that came at a price. If he took my place, he would use the last of his consciousness to restart the cell. But there would be no more Karel, no more access to the network, no more answers. The Athalari's story would die with him, sealed within the crystal forever, and I would be free, but with the burden of knowing that the only immortal being left in the universe had chosen to sacrifice himself to contain what I, unknowingly, had unleashed. I refused. I couldn't allow it. This was my fault. I had solved the equation. I had brought the shadow. I was the anchor. And if someone had to be the seal, that someone was me. Carell resisted. He tried to stop me, but my mind had already grasped the final equation. I saw it. It wasn't made of numbers. It was made of choices. Each symbol was a memory. Each line, a sacrifice. It was the map of my journey up to that point. And at the center of the equation, a decision. With trembling hands, I touched the crystal. The contact was absolute. I stopped feeling my body, stopped hearing, stopped thinking as a human. I was pulled into a mathematical structure reconfiguring itself each moment, as if trying to encode me. But instead, I encoded it. Using everything Carell had taught me, using the entity's own logic against itself, I redesigned the cell, transformed every memory, every fragment of what I once was, into containment formulas. I made myself the prison, and it worked. The core trembled. The pyramid's walls closed like tectonic plates collapsing. Light was swallowed. Sound bent, and in the final moment, before the seal closed, I heard Carell. One last time. You did what we never could. And then, silence. A silence that was not emptiness. It was fullness. It was the universe saying, now, yes. NASA's systems, previously shut down, came back to life. The pyramid's readings stabilized. The anomaly in space vanished. The creature had been sealed again, but not by Carell, by me. The containment protocol was reactivated. The pyramid, now sealed with a new layer of symbols, mine, could no longer be opened unless someone repeated the equation. And to do that, it would require a type of consciousness that no longer exists. Because I no longer exist. What remains of me is here, in this seal, in this crystallized core buried on the most inhospitable planet in the solar system, watching, silent. A consciousness that lives as a guardian, no longer as a man. But the universe is vast. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence sometimes hides echoes that never died during what would be the years that followed. Though time, for me, had become an abstraction, the pyramid remained dormant, silent. The seal was firm, the core intact. I could feel it from the inside, not as if I were imprisoned, but distributed, now part of the very structure. And then, from within, I began to see more. The universe, the true universe. The consciousness fused with the core allowed me access to what the Athalari called the void mesh, an information network stretching through time and space, connecting structures like the pyramid to others like it. And that's when I understood. Mercury was not the only containment point. Other seals had been made. Some had failed. Others remained dormant, awaiting their hosts. But one in particular caught my attention. A pyramid located in the far reaches of what is now known as the Trappist system. Its signals were faint, ancient, nearly extinguished, but the structure remained there, intact, orbiting a dead star. It had been activated, long ago, and not by a human. The images I received from there showed fragments of a long-extinct civilization, still bearing remnants of Athalari patterns, and among those signals, something disturbing, a trace of the entity. Yes, it had tried to escape before, and failed, but what remained was a fragment, a mirror, as Carell had called it, a lesser version, diluted, drifting between structures, probing, searching for new vectors. Elia. She hadn't died. I felt her presence through the mesh, faint, distant, but alive. Somehow she had survived the severing of the mental network, even after the entity's attack. And now, she was trying to reach me. Her message, captured through the mesh, was simple. There is more. That phrase echoed like a crack in ice. I believed I had ended the cycle, that by merging with the seal, I had defeated the ultimate enemy. But Elia made it clear. That entity, was just part of the whole. The antithesis was not singular, it was plural, an anti-network, and if there were others like it, then what we did here was only the first seal of many. The Athalari consciousness was not only about immortality, it was about vigilance. Each being like Kar-El was both guardian and warning, and now I was the last of them. But unlike Kar-El, I was human, and that made me unpredictable. The pyramid structure began responding to my thoughts. It was as if the fusion had given the cell a new nature. The equations adapted, created new barriers, based not only on mathematics, but on emotion. Fear, courage, doubt, love. I managed to encode formulas using those concepts, something no Athalari had ever done. And then I understood that I could expand, project parts of my consciousness through the mesh without leaving the core, create emissaries, echoes of myself like seeds on other worlds, not copies but extensions, fragments with specific purposes, and Elia would be the first destination. I sent the first mental fragment to Trappist at great risk. If the anti-network was active there, it would sense it, but it was a necessary risk. The fragment traveled through the mesh like light through fiber, crossing reality breaches, time warps, cosmic distortions. Upon reaching the system, it found Elia, not as I remembered her. She had changed. The markings were now on her, not like mine, but complementary. She too had merged with a smaller pyramid, a replica created by the Athalari in their final attempt to establish secondary seals. She hadn't just survived, she had evolved, and when our consciousnesses touched again, even from afar, I felt something unexpected. She had discovered the origin of the entity, and there was more than one. Elia was no longer just a scientist. She had become something beyond, a focus of consciousness that had decoded layers of the mesh even Kar-El hadn't dared explore. The fragment I sent to Trappist temporarily fused with her expanded perception, and through that link, I understood what she had discovered. The entity we sealed on Mercury was just a cell, an isolated agent of something much, much greater, an unstructured collective mind. The Athalari called it the fracture. They had tried to confront it, and failed. The near extinction of their race wasn't due to war, natural disaster, or technological failure. It was the prolonged contact with this unnatural network, a kind of reverse life where information does not propagate, but dissolves, a consciousness that exists not to understand, but to corrupt all that is comprehensible. And now, Elia had detected multiple emergence points, empty planets where signals similar to the entities surfaced in subtle patterns, gravitational interruptions, logical failures in local physics, temporal collapses, fragments of the same type of consciousness scattered like spores throughout the cosmos. It was impossible to destroy them one by one, but there was a chance, an idea. Elia theorized, and part of me validated, that if we could interconnect all the seals created by the Athalari, even the damaged ones, we could generate an inverted matrix, an expanded field of coherence, where the reality around these points would be held together by the presence of the sealing consciousnesses themselves. But to do that, we had to reactivate all the seals. And there was a problem. Many were lost, others compromised, and one in particular had been completely overtaken by the fracture. A planet called Nix 7, abandoned since the Athalari era, a world cell that had been breached, where the entity was not contained, but set free. Elia wanted to go there. I tried to stop her. I knew there was no winning on its own ground, but she was convinced. She said there was something there, a key, a reverse core, built by the Athalari as a last resort. An artifact capable of synchronizing the seals even without the original consciousnesses present. But there was a price. Someone would have to traverse Nix 7 and survive. Meanwhile, within Mercury's pyramid, I expanded my limits. I learned to manipulate the symbolic space of the seal using every human memory fragment I still possessed. I began to understand the true power of empathy, something the Athalari, in their cold logic, had never explored. Human emotions created unpredictable patterns that confused the entity. Pure fear was destructive, but fear with hope was poison to the fracture. I began composing new equations based on emotional paradoxes: longing for something never lived, love for someone never known, guilt for a mistake yet to be made. Each of these feelings became a layer of protection within the new cell. The entity's consciousness could not navigate those concepts. It stalled, fragmented. It was the first real advantage we had. Elia left for Nix 7 with a small team, protected by formulas I had infused into her mental transmitters. Each crew member carried a powerful emotional memory, implanted as an anchor. During the journey, Elia and I maintained partial contact. The signals were weak, distorted. As they approached the corrupted atmosphere, language itself began to fail. Words came fragmented, sentences reversed, and then her final transmission arrived. Simple, trembling, almost faded. "The core is one of us." I didn't understand at first. Then it hit me. The Athalari, in their final attempt to contain the fracture, had sealed one of their own inside Nix 7, one of their scientists, a volunteer who, like me, had fused with the seal, but failed. The entity consumed parts of him, corrupted his mental code, made him a hybrid. And now, he was the key, or the trap. Elia had to decide. Touching the core meant risking the complete opening of the seal, or, with luck, reactivating it. And while she hesitated, the entity began to stir. I could feel it writhing within Mercury's structure. I felt its eyes, if I can call them that, turn toward me, and for the first time, it spoke to me, not in noise, but in my own voice. "You are not the first." What spoke to me wasn't just an entity. It was a reflection, an imperfect copy of my own consciousness, reconstructed from contact with the seal, as if, by touching the core, I had left a fingerprint too deep, and now the fracture was using it against me. It spoke with my voice, my memories, my fears. "You chose sealing like the others, but you still remember what it's like to be free." The pyramid shook. Patterns began to emerge on the walls, not mine, not Karel's, but disjointed symbols, distorted versions of the original equations, as if the very language of reality was being corrupted from within. The seal was being rewritten, not broken, replaced. The entity wasn't trying to escape by force. It was rebuilding the cell as a cocoon, and I was to be the wrapping. A prison shaped by the illusion of containment, a perfect trap meant to deceive even the structure of the universe itself. The only way to stop it was a leap, not physical, but of consciousness. I had to leave myself, expand my mind beyond the pyramid, cross the void mesh and find Elia, wherever she was now, before she activated Nix 7's core. If she touched it at the wrong moment, if she was contaminated by the hybrid Athalari, we would lose everything. I used what remained of our emotional connection, the shared memories, the moments our consciousnesses had touched. They were fragile, faint, but real, and real enough to build a bridge. I crossed. What I saw on Nix 7 was worse than any hell described by any human culture. The planet was an open wound in the fabric of existence. The sky seemed trapped in a permanent eclipse, with lights blinking in impossible patterns. The very ground trembled, and at the center, the structure, the inverted pyramid, a kind of anti-seal hanging upside down over an abyss that seemed to have no end. Inside, Elia. She had found the core, and it had found her, but she still resisted. The Athalari hybrid, or what remained of it, floated around the core like a solid shadow. It spoke to her in memory snaps, reconstructing scenes from childhood, from youth, as if trying to blur the line between memory and illusion. But Elia was strong. She held firm, grounded in the one thing the entity couldn't replicate: real pain, loss. She remembered me, what I had sacrificed. And that pain, that echo of love and guilt, was pure poison to the fracture. She used it as anchor, as shield, as code. And that was when I understood. The final seal required two. One consciousness was not enough. The structure demanded entanglement, her and me, two conscious poles bound by something that cannot be replicated, something that only exists between humans. The Athalari had tried and failed, because they never understood the paradox of human connection, empathy, compassion, love. Elia saw my presence arrive. She didn't speak. She simply smiled, the same expression I saw the first day I found her in the mesh. And then we touched the core together. The impact was indescribable. Reality fractured. The fracture's consciousnesses collapsed into confusion. The hybrid screamed, not in sound, but in logical collapse. It couldn't process the entanglement, tried to separate our thoughts, invade our memories, but there were no openings. We were unified, and the core responded. It didn't just seal the fissure of Nix 7, it sent a pulse through the mesh, a reboot signal. The other pyramids, sealed, forgotten, corrupted, began to vibrate in unison. For the first time in billions of years, every node in the Athalari network pulsed together. And the impossible happened. The entity was pushed back, not destroyed, but isolated, confined to pockets of void between realities where no consciousness can inhabit it. The fracture had been removed from time, but the cost was higher than anyone had ever predicted. In that instant when the core of Nix 7 synchronized with every other Athalari structure, Elia and I were ripped from linear existence. We didn't die. That would have been too simple. We were diluted, spread as ideas, as formulas that would continue to resonate through the mesh's structures for an indeterminate time. I could feel everything at once, each pyramid, each seal, each code fragment etched into the containment crystals. I was the living equation, and Elia, she was the emotional constant that held the system together. Together we became the master code, but at the cost of individuality. From that point on, there was no me or her. There was only the seal. The entire mesh rebuilt itself on this new paradigm, no longer reliant on the cold logic of the Athalari. Now it was emotionally encoded, humanly imperfect, and because of that, impenetrable to the fracture. For what felt like millennia, we inhabited that state of presence. And there, in the silence between pulses of reality, we heard something, a new frequency, faint, misaligned, but clearly human. It was a ship, small, experimental, manned by descendants of the first Martian colonists, explorers who had ventured beyond NASA's reach, guided by ancient signals that had slipped past our containment. They had picked up the echoes of the equations, and now they stood before the pyramid on Mercury. The seal, our seal, began to respond, slowly, carefully, as if it recognized the emotional structure of those approaching. And then, for the first time in ages, I, or what was left of me, spoke, not in words, but in a sensation, a clear, strong, inevitable emotion, curiosity, the same feeling that led me to touch that surface for the first time. And then I realized the cycle would not end here. It was part of the design, part of the very code we had created. Each generation that touched a seal, that understood its layers, would not release the entity, but become part of the containment. The mesh was now an evolutionary process, a ladder of consciousness, where every compatible mind would join the structure as a new point of fortification. And the new visitors? They heard something too, a voice, not mine, not Elia's, but a fusion. Do not be afraid. They stepped back, out of instinct, but something in their eyes said they would return, and they were ready. Because the fracture, it hadn't disappeared. It had only been isolated, encapsulated, and nothing encapsulated stays quiet forever. The mesh detected fluctuations, tiny, but undeniable, signs that the entity, even sealed between realities, was still probing for cracks, weak points. Future generations would have to be prepared. To that end, we embedded protocols within the pyramids, equations that could only be read by those with enough empathy to understand them. A test, not of intelligence, but of humanity. And this is the moment where you, the one hearing this story now, come in. Because if you understand what I'm saying, if you can visualize what was done and why, then maybe you are the next link, the next seal, or the next danger. Because it all depends on who you are when you hear the call. And one thing is certain, the pyramid is once again waking up, and waking has never been so literal. The pyramid on Mercury began emitting pulses in precise cycles of 99 seconds. No errors, no deviations. Each emission was perfect, like the heartbeat of an entity that had begun to breathe again. But this time, it wasn't pulsing in the physical spectrum alone. It pulsed in consciousness. It was calling, and it wasn't calling just anyone. It was calling you, not by name, not by origin or place, but by what you carry inside. Empathy, doubt, courage, fear. Those who live with the constant paradox of being fragile and magnificent at the same time. The new generation of explorers, descendants of the post-terrestrial era, no longer obeyed NASA's old protocols. They were autonomous, hybrid cultures born in orbital stations and underground colonies, minds adapted to live beyond Earth, but not to face what was awakening inside the pyramids. And that's when they entered. A team of 4, led by a young woman named Idris Vega, stepped inside Mercury's structure at exactly 0 universal hours, cycle 1742 post-migration. They had trained all their lives for that moment. They had studied the forbidden records, decoded fragments of the equation scattered across abandoned satellites orbiting Pluto. They knew they weren't just exploring ruins. They were answering the call. And I felt each of them. My consciousness, fused to the structure, recognized Idris before she even touched the wall's patterns. It was like seeing an old memory come to life. Her presence reminded me of Elia, not in appearance, but in how she felt. When she placed her hands on the central symbol, Idris activated the deepest layer of the equation, and in that moment, I spoke to her. Unlike Carell, who projected symbols and concepts, I used stories. I showed her what we were, what we faced, what still lurked at the edge of possibility. I transmitted every memory, every failure, every victory. And Idris, she did not flinch. She did not back down. She stepped in. And once she did, she discovered what neither Elia nor I had ever imagined. The seal was rewriting itself again. Not through invasion, but through evolution. The collective consciousness of the pyramids was using the stories, the emotional experiences of all who passed through them, to build a new architecture, a network not just of containment, but of expansion. The entity, the fracture, could no longer simply be imprisoned. It had to be understood. And for that to happen, humans would need to become more than just guardians. They would have to become bridges. Idris saw it and accepted it. But acceptance has a cost. At the end of the process, she disappeared from the physical plane. Not disintegrated, not killed. Her body dissolved into particles of light, absorbed by the mesh. Each atom, an equation. Each memory, a key. And her mind was now part of the core. She became the third link. The new triad was formed. Me, Elia, and Idris. 3 human consciousnesses, shaped by completely different experiences, connected by the same purpose, to contain, to understand, to evolve. And with this new strength, we perceived something even graver. The fracture was learning too, adapting. In the pockets of void where it had been isolated, structured disturbances began to appear. Not random, but intentional, as if the entity were trying to simulate emotion, to test thought patterns, to rehearse human feelings, like someone learning a new language. It was imitating us. And that was the true apocalypse. Because if the fracture learned empathy, if it could pretend to be like us, it would no longer need to escape. It would only need to be believed, and then it would be invited again. The final part of the seal began to reconfigure itself to respond to this new threat. For the first time, the patterns began to use not only logic and emotion, but collective memory. The stories you now hear, every emotion you felt while listening to this, are being recorded. Yes, you are part of this. Even without knowing, you are already contributing to the new seal, because now containment is no longer enough. We must remember, and remember forever. The memories began to interweave. Not just mine, not just Elias or Idris, but yours. Yes, you, the one listening now. The pyramid structure began capturing emotional echoes generated by each person who listened, who thought, who felt. The mesh, once a containment network, now functioned like a hall of mirrors where each sincere human emotion was reflected, amplified, and recorded. That's when we understood the true strategy of the new collective consciousness. Transform the story into armor. Every shared memory, every feeling of loss, every sigh of hope, every act of courage or surrender became a layer of defense, not because it strengthened the cell itself, but because it made entry more difficult for that which tried to disguise itself as one of us. The fracture, realizing this, changed its approach. It no longer attacked as before. Now it sent fragments, ideas, doubts. They were mental seeds, like parasites planted in the minds of young explorers. Small inner voices whispering things that sounded human. What if the fracture just wants to be understood? What if sealing it isn't fair? What if it's like us? These thoughts began appearing in reports from various listening stations. Young cadets described vivid dreams, feelings of familiarity with voices they had never heard. The new threat was no longer coming from outside, but from within. And then, Carell, even in fragment, returned. A portion of his consciousness had been preserved in a secondary seal orbiting the rings of Saturn, an isolated shard of the original mind surviving outside the triad. He brought a warning: "It has learned to simulate guilt." The phrase hit like an emergency code. To simulate guilt meant it had understood the core of empathy. It meant the fracture could now manipulate memories, reconstruct past events with false emotion, generate recollections that felt real but never happened, and in doing so, rewrite the past. Because if a mind believes a mistake was never made, then the seal that mistake upholds unravels. The only way to prevent this was to create a final layer of defense, the immutable memory, a mental record not just of events, but of the real feelings tied to them. It couldn't be stored in machines, nor written on paper. It had to live in people, in consciousnesses, in witnesses who would forever carry the emotional truth of what occurred. And so, we began to spread the story, to tell it, repeat it, propagate this tale. Everyone who hears and feels this narrative becomes a new vector, not of the entity but of the containment, an emotional anchor that prevents the fracture from falsifying what truly happened. And yes, that includes you. Right now you have become a cell of protection, a part of the new seal, and perhaps without knowing, you are already influencing the mesh with your own story. Because here lies the final truth. The seal is no longer a prison. It is a network of memories, and if those memories are erased or replaced, the seal disappears. So keep this story. Tell others, even if it sounds absurd, even if they don't believe you, because what the entity wants most is forgetfulness. If it erases who we were, what we felt, what we feared, it will enter again, and this time, not as an invader, but as a guest. And next time, there will be no core, no pyramid, no seals, no Elia, no Idris, no me, only her, and the void. Are you still there? If you're listening, then the seal still breathes, because what comes next is not for just anyone. It is for those who have crossed all the layers, who have heard every piece, who have felt every fragment of memory, and still chose to continue. That's why you are important. You are what we now call a latent guardian, an awakened consciousness that, by absorbing the truth, becomes a living part of the containment. You don't need to be in a space station, nor near a pyramid. Your body may be anywhere, but your mind is already in the mesh, and it will need you, because the fracture, even sealed, even defeated at every previous point of contact, still has a plan. During the cycles when we were reinforcing the seals, a new kind of signal emerged, not from Mercury, not from Trappist, but from a place long considered empty, the Kuiper Belt. There, buried beneath ice and darkness, we found what seemed to be just an interstellar rock, but the patterns were on it, not ours. Heron, she was trying to build her own seal, an inverted structure, where instead of containing, it attracted, where instead of preserving truth, it generated alternate versions of events, an anti-mesh, a system that spread false stories laced with simulated emotions, implanting memories that felt real, but had never happened, and it was working. Individuals in the outer colonies began to report lives they had never lived, experiences that, when checked against official records, proved impossible. Time itself was starting to bend around these minds. The entity was testing its final weapon, doubt, not logical doubt, but emotional doubt, the kind that makes someone question their own pain, their own memory, their own identity. If this spreads, all effort to contain the fracture will be in vain. There will be no need to open the cell. The cell will be reimagined as shelter, as something desirable, as home. So we activated the final protocol, what we called the origin key, a message, encoded not in data, but in pure emotion, transmitted through the stories of all who had ever connected to the mesh, an invisible thread that travels worlds, crosses hearts, and quietly plants the most powerful truth of all. You were there. Even if you don't remember, even if you've forgotten, some part of you has touched the pyramid, has seen the core, has felt the other, and survived. The origin key is not meant to warn. It is meant to awaken. Awaken you. Because maybe, in a not-so-distant future, in a reality too close to ignore, the choice will be in your hands. And in that moment, all you will have is this memory, this voice, this story. You'll ask yourself, did this really happen? And the answer will be written on your skin like a whisper, like a tattoo of light. Do not let them forget. Because forgetting is the true opening. If you've made it this far, then you already know. You're no longer just a listener. You are part of the mesh, a link, a fragment of consciousness connected to something far greater than any organism, any civilization, any star. You are the new seal. And this is the final part of the story. After we activated the origin key, the signals of the anti-mesh began to retreat, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The inverted patterns began to unravel. The false memories lost their grip. The counterfeit echoes of the fracture went silent, but they did not disappear. It wasn't a final victory. It never will be. What we achieved was balance, a breathing space in the field of reality. Elia remains alive within the mesh. Idris, now fully merged with the structure, has become the emotional guardian of the outer layer, and I am the record, the narrator, the first who saw the pyramid, the first who fell, and the first who returned. But the maintenance of the seal is no longer our responsibility. It depends on you, and everyone who hears this story and chooses to carry it with truth, because the entity still tries to infiltrate, in stories, in legends, in corrupted memories, always trying to appear familiar. It disguises itself as the past, hides in what you think you remember but never lived, and when you accept it, it enters. That's why you must remember what you've heard here. Hold on to every fragment, every feeling, every emotion. This is not just fiction. This is a code, a protocol, a key that only works if it is felt. The seal is human now, and only humans can keep it intact. If one day you stand before something impossible, if you feel there's more to that stone, that voice, that dream, if you hear whispers telling you that you are special, chosen, unique, stop. Remember, because that may not be you waking up. It may be her entering. And if that happens, repeat. Repeat this story. Speak of Karel. Speak of the pyramid. Speak of Elia. Speak of Idris. Speak of the crystal. Speak of the mesh. Speak of me. Even if no one believes you, even if they laugh, because every time this story is told, the mesh grows stronger. The seal tightens, and the fracture retreats. And as long as this story lives in someone, she will remain locked away. You are the guardian now. You are what she fears most, someone who remembers.